Hello everybody, my name is Cody Rakes. I'm the Director of Farm and Land Development at the Loretto Motherhouse Farm. To my left is my wife Angela. This is our oldest child Elizabeth. She just turned 3. This is John Richard. He turned 1 almost a month ago. But this part of the video, we are in our home in Loretto. And at our home in Loretto, we have a small flock of chickens that Elizabeth takes care of. So Elizabeth sells eggs to some family and friends here locally. We also raise a garden here at our property. So Angela and I both have an agricultural background. We both attended the University of Kentucky. I have a degree in agriculture education and a minor in plant and soil sciences. And Angela's degree is in agriculture, public service, and leadership with an emphasis in informal education and a minor in agricultural economics.
So as Cody serves as the farm director, I recently started serving at the Mother House as the education and outreach coordinator. So I help the farm with a lot of educational events. I also do education and outreach on the General Mother House campus as well. So we spend a lot of our time working together as a team. And if you follow us on Facebook, which we encourage everyone to do, you will oftentimes see these two littles playing with their chickens or collecting eggs or working with us in the garden.
At the Loretto Motherhouse Farm, we have about 800 acres. And if you're not familiar with what an acre is, it's about the size of a football field. So on this farm, we have about 800 football fields that I get to manage on a daily basis. Of those 800 acres, they are portioned out for different uses. We have about 300 acres that are in woodlands. We've got about 200 acres in pasture and hay. The field that I'm currently setting in is a pasture field. We have about 200 acres in row crops, so that would be corn and soybeans and wheat and cover crops. We also use those fields to do some grazing from time to time and some hay production from time to time. We have about 75 acres in dedicated conservation programs, like the Conservation Reserve Program, where we have fields that are planted in native grasses and wildflowers. We also have some riparian buffers separating surface water areas like streams and ponds from areas that may be getting fertilizer or herbicides. We also have a number of acres of water, streams, creeks, ponds, lakes. And there's a number of acres in the balance that would be the campus area, the nursing home and the buildings of the Sisters of Loretto here on campus.
We come from the water, living in the water, go back to the water, turn the world around.
The Loretto Motherhouse Farm is committed to the long-term sustainability of the land. All life here is to be enhanced and protected, a variety of ecosystems maintained, and the ecological balance preserved. 3 goals guide our work: to protect undisturbed spaces, to regenerate degraded spaces, and to mitigate and reduce carbon emissions. Behind me are our spring calving group. These cows begin calving about the 1st of March, and they'll calve all the way through about the end of April. We have 2 different calving groups, one in the spring, one in the fall. That allows us to have a supply of animals throughout the year to go to the processing facility for our grass-finished beef program. And so one of the ways that we care for our animals and that we have a successful grass-finished beef program is by doing birth to plate. So these animals are not being in stressful situations of going through sale barns and being sold to another producer, another farmer, and another farm, and being moved from farm to farm to farm. These animals are always right here on this farm. That greatly cuts down on the number of healthcare issues that we have with our cattle. We do use a vaccination protocol to try and be proactive against some of the diseases that are prevalent, that are continually a problem for beef producers in the country and in this area in particular. But we also do use antibiotics and those kind of things whenever animals do become sick. The first year that we started doing the grass-fed, grass-finished beef program, we probably treated about 20% of our herd with antibiotics. But as we have transitioned into doing a more holistic approach to healthcare and vaccinations and everything, now we probably treat less than 1% of our animals on an annual basis for pink eye issues. So I mentioned earlier the grass-finished beef program. Behind me are the feeder calves that are in that grass-finished beef program. So this is part of our commitment to food, commitment to local community. We practice a lot of organic principles. We practice a lot of American Grass-Fed Association principles, but we're not certified by any of those groups. Those certifications wouldn't give us a lot of market advantage in this area, so we haven't pursued those. We're not nearly as concerned about the label of organic as much as we are about the relationships that we have with our consumers and the individuals who are eating the products that we're growing here on the farm, whether it be our grass-finished beef, our sweet corn, our pumpkins, whatever other things we may look at growing in the future. We're interested in the relationships with our consumers and our consumers' relationship with us as the farmers. So some of the ways that we make our grass-finished beef program work is we use a variety of different kinds of forages. In this field that we're currently standing in, currently what we have growing here are winter annuals. These are plants that we planted back in the fall. We're just now getting in here and started doing some grazing, so it's been growing ever since then with no cattle in here. And so now we're grazing this field. And while we're grazing this field, our perennial fescue pastures and orchard grass and clover pastures are able to get some growth and be ready so that once these cattle have grazed this field, we can then take these cattle off onto some of our perennial fields. And those fields have been able to gather some accumulation. They've got some size to them so that when we come in and we graze the top third from those plants, those roots that are underneath of those plants are also being sloughed off as we graze the tops of those plants. And so when those roots are being sloughed off, that is stimulating soil biology. And those roots that are sloughing off are creating soil organic matter, and that is how we are sequestering carbon here at the Loretto Motherhouse with our beef cattle operation. Right now I'm with our fall cows. These cows begin calving about the 1st of September, calve through about the end of October. So the calves that are on these cows right now are about 6 or 7 months old. And these cows right now are basically roughing it. In contrast to the feeder calves that we were showing you earlier that are on some really good high quality forages, well, these cows right now are on some pretty low quality forages, but it is very cheap forage what we have available for these cows right now. So what they're grazing right now is called stockpiled fescue. Basically, we pull these cows off of our perennial fescue pastures in around the 1st of September, end of August. Whenever these cows begin to start calving, we'll bring them up to the barn and start feeding them hay. At that time of the year, it's dry, so we can feed hay at the barn. We're not causing mud, we're not causing ruts, we're not having environmental issues like that. In contrast, we could feed these cows hay this time of year and be out here when it's wet, it's damp, it's cold, and creating lots of issues out in the fields. So we choose to do it that way because it provides us better soil cover through the winter because we have this fescue standing on top of the soil. It is intercepting those raindrops. It is protecting the soil. It's keeping the soil covered so we don't have erosion. We have living green plants 365 days a year. We don't have mud and ruts that we have to come back in and try to fix that open up and create spots for weeds to come in. So you may notice that the terrain behind me is much different than what you've been seeing so far. But this is the area of the farm that the beef cattle really thrive in. We can't grow crops. We can't grow sweet corn. We can't grow lettuce. We can't grow any of those kinds of things in this type of environment. It's too rough. It's too hilly. The topsoil is not thick enough and not deep enough. We've got rocks laying on top of the ground. We have tree lines. This is an area where beef cattle and other types of livestock really fit in and are able to grow food for us. This is another way that we also live in communion with nature. Instead of taking these trees out and trying to flatten out the hills and do away with the ditches and gullies. We're living with what nature has provided for us, and we're working with that. These cattle are grazing in communion with wildlife, deer, rabbits, turkeys, squirrels. Those kind of animals are constantly out here with these beef cattle while they're out grazing in these pastures.
Wow, so is life, oh Patty, wow, so is life.
I'm standing in one of our crop fields amongst some of our cover crops that we have growing. Some of the ways that some of the practices that we use in our cropping system to follow a more regenerative path are crop rotation. So we basically never grow the same crop in the same field 2 years in a row. We always are changing what is grown in those fields. That helps us with weed issues and pest issues. Another thing that we use is no-till. That is extremely important, utilizing no-till planting techniques in order to preserve the soil in its natural state. That helps to prevent erosion. We're not tilling the soil and exposing the soil to wind and rain and those erosion events. The no-till technique also preserves the soil biology. You heard me talking about the number of microorganisms that are in the soil. We are relying strongly on those soil microorganisms to help provide nutrients from the soil to the plants, and building those plant and soil interfaces through mycorrhizal fungi and all the different organisms that are associated in the soil with the root structures and the nutrients that are available. And so we want to preserve those biological communities in order for those plants to be able to thrive. No-till is extremely important for that. Another really important tool that we use is cover cropping. We've been about 2 or 3 years now, we've been able to 100% cover crop every acre that we are growing cash crops in or row crops in. Every year we've kind of taken it a step farther and a step farther. Last year was the first year that we really got our feet wet in what's called planting green. What that means is that we actually came into a field that looked very similar to this and planted our corn and other cash crops directly into this before it was ever even killed. We do use herbicides to kill this cover crop. However, with using these cover crops, we're preventing weeds. The herbicides that we're using are to kill the cover crop. We do use much less herbicides when utilizing the cover crops than we do whenever we don't utilize the cover crops. So while we are still using herbicides, by using the cover crops, we're using less herbicides than in a system where we're not utilizing cover crops. So we're building a more resilient system by cover cropping, no-tilling, integrating livestock into the system. We can also graze these cover crops in order to remove this biomass. And basically, all of these four-legged beef cattle that we have running around are like four-legged composting machines. All of these components being integrated with one another is absolutely important. We try our best not to look at a field as though this is a crop field. Yes, it's a crop field, but we also use it for grazing. I've kind of turned up things upside down here. I've got a handful of soil, and I want to show you and explain to you the difference in dirt and soil. Gabe Brown, a world-renowned speaker on regenerative agriculture, kind of coined the term dirt to soil. And what he refers to with that is the infusion of life. And so the difference in dirt and soil is whether or not it's alive. And what we have here on the farm is living soil. Whenever we dig soil up, what we're going to find is earthworms. We're going to find channels dug in the soil from earthworms and other kinds of living organisms in the soil. If you had a microscope, you could look at this, and I mean, you would just see millions and millions of different kinds of bacteria and fungi and all those different kinds of things. And all of these living roots that are growing in this soil. And one thing I want to point out is these roots here that have these little white appendages on the sides of them. These are roots of a plant called hairy vetch. I'll pull up some leaves here so that you can see what the leaves on hairy vetch look like. So this is a vining plant that we plant in our cover crop mixes, and it is a legume, which means that it is a plant that is able to have a symbiotic relationship with rhizobium bacteria. And that rhizobium bacteria and the legume plant are able to form what are called nodules, and that's these little white appendages. And these little nodules are basically nitrogen producing factories. And if you pinch them and they are red on the inside, well, that one was brown because of my dirty finger, but if they are red on the inside, that means that they are working, because red or pink or orange or any of those kind of colors, because the byproduct of that nitrogen production is a compound very similar to hemoglobin, which is the red portions of the blood in our bodies. So this soil is absolutely alive, and we've got to feed that life and provide for that life so that that life can in turn provide for our lives and the lives of all of the other constituents of the ecosystem and the environment. I am honored to share my family and my passion with you during this Earth Day celebration. I hope you will join me in a commitment to do our part to protect undisturbed spaces, regenerate degraded spaces, and to mitigate and reduce carbon emissions in order to secure a better Earth for all its future inhabitants.
We are